Whether Sweden was truly neutral in a World War II has been the subject of much debate over the years. In what follows, I would like to present to you how Sweden assisted both Nazi Germany and the Allied powers. Sweden, during the Second World War, declared an official policy of non-belligerency, meaning that the nation itself was unattached to either the Allied powers or the Axis powers. Since the Napoleonic Wars, Sweden had attempted to maintain this policy of neutrality. Whether the Swedes and even the government themselves steadfastly adhere to this policy is questionable. However, especially in the years 1939 to 1945. One key feature of Sweden's lack of neutrality in the Second World War is closely linked with its long history with Finland. Finland was a co-belligerent with Germany, meaning that it engaged in the war as support for Germany. As opposed to its official government policy, when called to fight in Finland, as many as 8,000 Swedes volunteered. In his response to German pleas for volunteers against the Soviet Union, around 180 Swedes joined the German Waffen-SS. It was always the individual choice to enlist. However, the government also helped in ways such as sending food, ammunition, weapons and medicine to Finland during conflict. While the number of Swedish volunteers was comparatively small compared to some other nations, the country's willingness to help in the war effort surely points to its obvious lack of neutrality. Even if officially government policy stated the country was a non-belligerent position, the actions of people in the nations are what ultimately reveal the true nature of the attitudes, and this undeniably shows Swedish refusal to sit on the sidelines and do nothing. Another concern for Sweden during the war was trade. At the beginning of World War II, an agreement had been signed by Sweden, the United Kingdom and Germany in order to sustain vital trade, but the Swedish shipping began to be attacked. As a result, trade with Britain reduced by about 70%, and it increased with Germany, culminating in 37% of Swedish exports being to Germany alone. The Battle of the Atlantic was what caused Swedish trade to be blocked, but a few vessels, known as the Safe Conduct Traffic, were allowed through the United States and some neutral nations in Latin America. This leads on to arguably the biggest point concerning Swedish support for the Axis powers, and why historians are still debating Swedish neutrality during World War II: the iron ore trade. Germany used this ore on its weapon production, and trade from Sweden to Germany eventually became so large that 10 million tons of iron ore per year was shipped to the Third Reich. The government did not interfere with the trade because of its official policy of neutrality. British intelligence had identified German dependency on this production of ore and estimated that Germany's preparation for war could end in a disaster if there were to be a delay in exports. Therefore, the Allies planned to seize the iron ore deposits by using the Soviet attack on Finland in November 1939 as a cover. They planned to gain Norwegian and Swedish permission to send expeditionary forces to Finland, under the pretense of helping the Finnish, and once there, they would take control of the northern cities to gain access to the ore and deny German access to it. However, the Norwegians and Swedes realized the danger of allowing expeditionary forces to be sent across their nations and so refused to allow it. Sir Ralph Glynn had even claimed that if iron ore exports were stopped, an end to the war would have been imminent, showing the Allies' belief in the importance of Swedish trade to Germany and so alluding to the lack of neutrality of Sweden during the Second World War. A final point regarding support for the Axis powers in World War II concerns Operation Barbarossa, the German plan to invade the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941. The Germans asked the Swedes to allow German armed forces to be transported by train through Swedish land from Norway to Finland. There was a huge controversy surrounding what government should do, and the political debates around the issue became known as the Midsummer Crisis. This was the first point in the war where the Swedish government itself, as opposed to simply the people, was asked to reject its foreign policy of 600 years. The four-party coalition that ruled Sweden was in disagreement, with the conservative and agrarian parties, the Swedish Foreign Office and Gustav V all wanting to grant Germany permission, In opposition, the Social Democratic Party and the Liberal Party wanted to adhere to their foreign policy. In the end, permission was granted to Germany, and thus the Swedish government showed opposition to its country's long-held foreign policy. Firstly, intelligence played a huge part in Swedish support for the Allies, as military intelligence was shared between them. Due to its neutral stance, Sweden was able to gain physical access to Germany, which was useful for both Swedish and Allied intelligence, and the Polish resistance was assisted as employees at factories acted as couriers for messages. Moreover, German telegram passed through the Swedish leased cables, allowing the Swiss to intercept them, and due to Arndt Börling breaking the cipher code in summer 1940, the messages were understood and the Polish resistance movement conveyed this to the Allies. Another example is when the German battleship Bismarck set off to attack the Atlantic convoys. Swedish intelligence informed the British. In addition, Swedish businessmen, diplomats and emissaries actively spied for the Allies in cities such as Berlin. Secondly, militarily, Sweden assisted the Allies. They helped to train soldiers, originally refugees from other European nations, and allowed Swedish air bases to be used in the last few years of war. On June 13, 1944, a V-2 rocket being tested by the Germans crashed in Sweden, and they exchanged wreckage with Britain for Supermarine Spitfires. In another instance, the Swedish merchant navy, totaling around 8,000 seamen, found itself outside the Baltic, and from May 1940 was loaned to the Britain. The Allies began preparing to liberate Denmark and Norway in 1945, and they wanted Sweden involved, and so the nation began preparing for Operation Save Denmark, where they were to invade Zealand from Scania. Sweden then planned to assist the Allies in the invasion of Norway, and whilst this is not necessary in the end, US planes used Swedish military bases during the eventual liberation. Finally, an integral part of what creates doubt around Sweden's policy of non-belligerency was its part in hosting and assisting refugees and Jews who were being persecuted by Hitler, and the policy of the final solution. Sweden became a place of refuge for these people, and nearly all Denmark's 8,000 Jews were brought to Sweden after the order to deport all Danish Jews in 1943. Norwegian and Finnish Jews also fled to Sweden, and many stayed there after the war too. While this shows a lack of neutrality with its open defiance to Germany's cause, ironically it was Sweden's policy of neutrality that allowed Jews to seek refuge there, as Germany wouldn't invade the country. In conclusion, I think it's safe to state that Sweden was only in name a neutral country during the course of the Second World War. Arne Ruth argues that Sweden was not neutral, Sweden was weak. And Winston Churchill believed that Sweden ignored the greater moral issues of the war and played both sides for profit. Although this could perhaps be discredited due to the evidence that points to the country's immense help in saving so many victims of the Nazi regime. I am waiting for your opinion down in the comments.